The wind howled along the Dorset cliffs as Clara Ellison tightened her coat and stepped out of the carriage. Before her stood Windcliff Manor, a towering Victorian house perched precariously over the edge of the sea. Its tall windows reflected the last pale light of dusk, and its stone gargoyles seemed to stare down with grim, lifeless eyes. Clara had accepted the commission with excitement. Restoring Windcliff Manor was not only an opportunity to revive her career as an architect but also to breathe life into a place that had been abandoned for nearly half a century. The local villagers, however, had offered only silence when she mentioned her work. They exchanged glances and muttered that the cliffs had a memory of their own. Inside, the air smelled of salt and dust. The grand hall stretched before her, with a broken chandelier dangling like a skeletal hand above her head. She ran her fingers along the carved oak banister and felt a faint tremor, as though the wood pulsed beneath her touch. Shaking off the thought, she lit her lantern and began exploring. In the drawing room, she discovered an enormous mirror covered with a heavy cloth. Out of curiosity, she pulled it down, and her reflection emerged faintly in the dusty glass. But then, behind her reflection, something shifted. The shape of a woman, half hidden in shadow, passed across the room. Clara spun around. The chamber was empty. Her heart quickened. She told herself it was only her imagination, the trick of failing light and dust. Yet when she looked back at the mirror, the figure remained, standing silently at her shoulder, its face blurred but unmistakably female. The lantern flickered. The air grew colder. Clara whispered into the silence, "Who's there?" But the figure only tilted its head, as if it recognized her. The sea thundered below the cliff, and with a sharp crack, the mirror split down its center, leaving Clara staring into a fractured image of herself, one side her own face, the other side the blurred woman's. And then, from somewhere deep within the manor, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. The footsteps echoed closer, slow and deliberate, until they seemed to stop just outside the drawing room. Clara froze, clutching her lantern, her breath shallow. She forced herself to whisper, "Hello?" Yet no voice replied. Only silence and the distant crash of waves against the cliff. Gathering her courage, she stepped into the corridor. The lantern flame swayed, casting long, trembling shadows along the paneled walls. The air was colder here, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. She followed the corridor, her footsteps cautious, until she noticed something strange. One section of the wainscoting did not align with the others. The carved pattern broke abruptly, as though a panel had been replaced. She pressed her hand against it. The wood gave way slightly beneath her palm, revealing a narrow crack. With effort, she pushed, and the panel swung inward with a groan. A hidden passage stretched before her, swallowed in darkness. Inside, the walls were rough stone, dripping with moisture. The passage descended deeper beneath the manor, twisting as though carved by uncertain hands. Clara's lantern revealed faded markings on the wall, initials, dates, and crude sketches of faces. Some were centuries old. Halfway down, she discovered a small alcove. Resting on a crumbling shelf was a bundle of papers tied with a faded ribbon. She opened them carefully, her eyes widening. They were blueprints, architectural designs of Windcliff Manor itself. But what unsettled her was the signature at the bottom of each page, Eliza Harrow, dated 1872. The handwriting looked eerily familiar, almost identical to her own. A chill ran through her. She tucked the papers under her arm and pressed on, her curiosity overwhelming her fear. The passage led to a heavy door reinforced with iron. She tried the handle, but it would not move. Just as she turned back, the sound returned, footsteps, this time from within the locked chamber. The door shuddered as though something on the other side pressed against it, and faintly, through the iron, a woman's voice whispered, "You found me." Clara stumbled back from the iron door, her lantern shaking in her hand. The whisper was so close, so human, that her throat tightened with fear. For a moment she thought she should flee the manor altogether, abandon the commission and never return. Yet something in the voice, gentle, almost pleading, pulled her forward instead of away. She pressed her ear to the cold metal. Silence followed, as though the words had been carried away by the damp air of the corridor. When she finally turned back toward the passage, the flame in her lantern guttered, and she froze. There, standing in the narrow tunnel, was the same blurred figure she had seen in the mirror. The woman's form was faint, her outline shimmering as though woven from smoke. Clara's breath caught as she noticed the uncanny resemblance, the slope of her shoulders, the curve of her face. It was like staring at a reflection that time itself had warped. The woman lifted her hand and placed it against the wall, her expression unreadable. Clara, without thinking, raised her own hand to the opposite stone. For an instant, the air trembled between them, and Clara felt a warmth seep into her palm, as though the figure's hand truly pressed against hers. Then, as quickly as she appeared, the woman slipped back into the shadows of the tunnel. Clara hurried after her, but the passage ended abruptly at solid stone. She struck it with her palm, but it gave no sound of hollowness, only unyielding rock. Back in the grand hall, Clara lit more candles to drive away the growing chill. She unrolled the blueprints she had found, spreading them across a cracked oak table. As her eyes followed the lines of the design, she realized something extraordinary. The blueprints were not only plans for Windcliff Manor, they included corridors and chambers that did not exist in the current house. Rooms hidden within rooms. Walls concealing entire staircases. And at the center of it all, a symbol repeated over and over, an ornate oval with two intersecting lines. Clara traced it with her fingertip. At that moment, the nearest mirror shuddered in its frame. She turned sharply, and within its cracked surface, she saw the woman again, clearer now, her face pale, her eyes deep and sorrowful. The woman mouthed words that Clara could not hear, then slowly raised a finger and pointed, not at the mirror, not at the hall, but directly at Clara herself. The candles flickered violently, and the room plunged into near darkness. The candles hissed as though drowned by an unseen wind. Clara clutched the blueprints to her chest, her pulse hammering in her ears. Darkness pressed close, broken only by the faint glow of her lantern. She forced herself to breathe, steadying her trembling hands. She studied the repeated oval symbol more closely. It was drawn not only on the blueprints but also etched faintly into the oak table itself, carved as though by someone who had sat here long before her. The lines were almost identical to the way she signed her own designs. She whispered the name on the paper. Eliza Harrow. The sound of it filled the silence of the hall. Something about the surname stirred a memory, though she could not place it. Determined, she carried the blueprints upstairs to the manor's library. The room smelled of mildew and forgotten years. Shelves sagged under the weight of crumbling books. She lit a few candles and began pulling volumes from the lower rows, her fingers coated in dust. After hours of searching, she found a thin ledger bound in cracked leather. Inside were records of the manor's construction, each entry written in faded ink. The name Eliza Harrow appeared again and again, always noted as assistant to the master architect, though the handwriting on the entries looked like hers, not his. As the pages turned, Clara realized something chilling. Every drawing, every calculation credited to Eliza had been scratched over, erased, or reassigned. It was as though she had been deliberately removed from history. A floorboard groaned above her head. She froze, the ledger open in her lap. Slowly, she raised her lantern and peered upward. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and for a moment she thought she saw a shadow move along the upper gallery. She whispered into the emptiness. "Eliza, what did they do to you?" As though in answer, the ledger slipped from her fingers and fell open on the stone floor. The pages fluttered until they stopped at a single line scrawled in darker ink than the rest. Clara leaned closer, heart racing. It read, "The design is not complete until the blood of the maker seals the walls." Before she could absorb the words, a crash resounded through the library. One of the tall mirrors leaning against the wall toppled forward, shattering across the floor. Within the shards, Clara glimpsed not one reflection, but dozens, each showing herself in different rooms of the manor, moving where she was not. And in every fragment, the woman stood beside her. The shattered glass glittered across the library floor like fragments of frozen water. Clara staggered back, her chest tightening. Dozens of reflections stared at her from the shards, each showing her in another part of the manor, climbing stairs, opening doors, standing by windows that had long been bricked shut. Yet in every vision, the blurred woman stood at her side, like a silent companion tethered to her fate. A low hum began to vibrate through the floor, soft at first but growing until the books trembled on their shelves. Clara knelt and snatched up the ledger, the words on the final page searing themselves into her mind. The design is not complete until the blood of the maker seals the walls. Her throat went dry. She thought of Eliza Harrow, erased from the records, her work stolen. Was this woman bound to the manor because she had been denied recognition, her name silenced in ink? Or was it something older, something stitched into the stone itself? A sudden draft snuffed out half the candles. In the wavering shadows, Clara saw that one of the mirrors, though shattered, now framed a doorway. Its fragments had fallen into an oval shape on the floor, almost identical to the architect's mark. She stepped cautiously toward it, her breath misting in the cold. The oval of glass shimmered like water, and when she leaned closer, her own reflection reached back, yet its expression was not her own. The reflection smiled faintly, eyes hollow, lips curved with knowing intent. Clara's skin prickled. "You are not me," she whispered. The reflection tilted its head, then extended its hand toward her through the glimmering surface. For a moment, she thought she felt a pull, an invisible thread tugging at her wrist. But she tore herself back, stumbling over the ledger. As she scrambled to her feet, the walls around her groaned, as though the house itself had woken. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The blueprints fluttered open on the table once more, this time to a page Clara had not seen. It showed a chamber at the manor's heart, round, windowless, sealed away by layers of stone. At its center was drawn the same oval mark. And beneath it, a single line of script: the keeper must choose to enter. A sharp crack split the silence. The library door swung wide, though no hand had touched it. Beyond, the corridor stretched into darkness, waiting. Clara stepped into the corridor, lantern trembling in her hand. The air seemed heavier here, pressing against her chest as she followed the narrow passage. The manor groaned around her, beams creaking as though every wall strained to listen. The path wound downward, deeper than she thought the house should allow. The stones were damp, slick beneath her boots, and her breath clouded with every exhale. Finally, she reached a heavy archway sealed with bricks. The blueprints had led her here, the hidden chamber. Her fingers brushed the mortar. It was brittle with age, crumbling under her touch. With effort, she pushed at the loose stones until one fell away, echoing into darkness beyond. Heart racing, she pried another loose, then another, until an opening large enough to step through yawned before her. The chamber inside was round, just as drawn, its ceiling low and domed. The air was stagnant, carrying a scent of iron and decay. Along the walls, faint carvings etched into stone spiraled inwards, forming the oval mark again and again until it converged on the center of the floor. There, in the middle of the room, stood a single object, a tall mirror, its frame wrought in black iron, its surface clouded as though filled with smoke. Clara approached cautiously, her lantern's glow reflecting weakly off the glass. Within the mirror, the woman waited. No longer blurred, her face was clear, pale, beautiful, sorrowful. Her eyes locked on Clara's, and for a moment it was like looking into herself, only separated by a century. "Eliza Harrow," Clara whispered. The woman nodded, her lips parting, though Clara could not hear her voice. Instead, words began to form across the mirror's surface, scrawled in mist. "The blood seals the design." Clara's stomach turned. She remembered the ledger, the warning that the walls demanded the maker's blood. Her hand tightened on the lantern, but she could not move, could not look away. The woman raised her palm, pressing it against the glass. Slowly, a crimson streak spread outward, as though blood had bloomed beneath the surface. She looked at Clara with pleading eyes, then mouthed a final word. "Choose." The lantern flame wavered violently, and the walls groaned as if the house itself awaited her decision. Clara's breath came in shallow bursts as the chamber seemed to close in around her. The mirror pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat trapped within glass. The word "choose" still lingered across the surface, fading only when her hand hovered near it. Her mind raced. If Eliza Harrow had been erased from history, if her blood had been demanded by the very walls she designed, then why was Clara, more than a century later, drawn into the same snare? Unless... Her lantern shook as the thought struck her. The handwriting in the blueprints. The resemblance in the mirror. The surname that had stirred a memory. Harrow. She whispered aloud, her voice breaking. "Am I your blood?" The figure in the glass nodded slowly, sorrow etched into every line of her face. Clara staggered back, her pulse hammering in her ears. The manor wasn't simply haunted, it was bound by lineage. She hadn't just inherited the commission. She had inherited the debt. The mirror darkened suddenly, swirling like storm clouds. Words etched themselves in blood-red script across the surface. The design will claim its maker. The keeper must yield. The ground trembled. Stones cracked along the walls, dust showering the chamber. Clara lifted her lantern, the flame sputtering wildly. She wanted to flee, to escape into the cold night and never return. But the door she had broken open was now sealed with stone once more. "Eliza," she cried, pressing her palm to the mirror. "There must be another way." The woman on the other side mirrored her gesture. For an instant, warmth spread from the glass into Clara's hand, so vivid, so real, that tears pricked her eyes. Eliza leaned close, her lips forming silent words. "Finish it." The glass rippled like water, and Clara felt the pull again, stronger this time, tugging her hand through the surface. She resisted, trembling, but the air around her thickened, her limbs heavy as though the house itself was dragging her down. And then, from deep within the mirror, came a sound that made her blood freeze, the tolling of a bell, slow and resonant, echoing from no place she knew. Each strike reverberated through the stone walls, through her chest, until she could hardly tell if it was the house, or her own heart, that was being measured. The seventh toll sounded, and the mirror cracked. The crack spread like lightning across the mirror's surface. Clara staggered back as shards splintered inward, yet the glass did not fall. Instead, it opened, rippling into a portal of shifting smoke. From within, Eliza's pale hand reached out again, not with menace, but with desperate plea. The toll of the bell continued, slow and relentless. 8, 9, 10. Each strike seemed to strip away the strength in Clara's chest. She realized the house would not release her. Not unless the bloodline fulfilled its vow. Her lantern flickered, then died, plunging the chamber into darkness save for the glow of the mirror. In that dim light, Clara saw her own reflection standing beside Eliza. The two of them, past and present, bound together. Tears blurred her vision. "If I go through," she whispered, "will it end?" Eliza nodded, her face solemn, lips parting in a final soundless word. "Keeper." The word struck Clara with cold clarity. Windcliff did not demand an architect. It demanded a guardian. And she, by blood and by fate, had been chosen. With trembling resolve, Clara pressed her palm to the mirror. The surface was no longer hard but liquid, cold and pulling. She gasped as it swallowed her hand, then her arm, then her whole body. The last thing she heard before the darkness closed around her was the 12th toll of the bell. Silence fell. When the mirror stilled once more, the chamber was empty. Only the faint outline of two women remained in the glass, Eliza and Clara, standing side by side, watching forever from the other side. Above, the manor ceased its groaning. The walls grew still, the dust settled. Windcliff had its keeper once again. But anyone who dared enter after that night swore they heard a bell tolling deep within the house. 12 strokes. Always 12. And sometimes, in the mirrors, a figure would appear, waiting.